Hello. My name is Jeanette. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to delve into the case of NXIVM and the twisted sex cult of Keith Renery. NXIVM was a multi-level marketing self-help company that revered one man as their idol. Keith Renery appeared to be in touch with a deeper understanding of the human mind and seemed able to share that understanding through his teachings to help people lead better lives. Little did his followers know that this short, nerdy-looking guru was actually using NXIVM as a guise to manipulate people and coerce women into taking these bizarre, compromising photos of themselves, as well as performing one big elaborate psychological experiment for decades. I actually live kind of near where a lot of this happened, so I've spent a long time researching this from even before when the New York Times article came out, and I have poured over a good amount of media, whether it was like TV shows or newspaper articles, stuff like that. So I think that I have a pretty interesting perspective on this one. In my research, I found some information that wasn't reported on heavily in the media, so stay tuned because you won't want to miss that. Since this is a young channel, I'm always looking for feedback on how to improve these videos, so please comment what you think and also what cases you might like to see in the future. And then make sure to like this video. So what is NXIVM? From the outside, NXIVM appeared to be a company that offered personal and professional development seminars that were part of its executive success programs. A corporation could enroll their employees in a training session, though those sessions were very costly. Most members ended up being individuals who had money to put into these kinds of training sessions, like minor celebrities, socialites, and wealthy housewives. The members of this self-help group believed that Keith Renery, the founder and leader of this movement, was a revolutionary and had come up with an amazing program that could change lives. Upon his request, the members of NXIVM called him Vanguard, which Keith claimed meant the leader of a philosophical movement. That interpretation of the definition is a little bit skewed towards Keith Renery's will. Then again, as you'll find out, a lot of the philosophical teachings that he touted were skewed towards his will as well. This manipulation of the collective consciousness that Keith was trying to achieve to suit his own selfish goals was what led to the downfall of NXIVM. The group was founded in 1998 by Keith Raniere and Nancy Salzman, a former nurse with experience in hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming. So Nancy was called Prefect and Keith Renery was called Vanguard. So they kind of like had these little made up names for each other. She was his second in command. So she ended up being his first student ever. And so then she like kind of by default became his second in command. So Keith was interested in hypnosis and he had some background in it as well as Salzman, but he was really interested in this neuro-linguistic programming thing. So NLP is a pseudoscience, which is an outdated form of therapy that never was really an accepted method of cognitive therapy anyway, that was used by licensed therapists at least. It kind of goes hand in hand with hypnosis. But with that, the idea behind NLP is that humans are programmed to act a certain way through extended periods of exposure to certain language, which can do certain kinds of damage to us psychologically. So a therapist using this method would model the language of a successful person, then the client would follow suit. And through this language acquisition, they would also acquire the skills of a successful person. I get the premise and it sounds to the layman like a great idea, but it's not a proven method that works often enough to call it a science, though I don't doubt that some people sincerely believe that it changed their lives. Anyway, Raniere claimed his main goal was to, quote, have people experience more joy in their lives. And by 2003, it appeared that the organization was on that path with over 3,000 people having taken part in ESP courses, attracting a lot of well-known people, including a former Surgeon General, Richard Branson, and the heiresses to the Seagrams fortune, like Seagrams soda, it's like a sodas and stuff, Clare and Sara Bronfman. So who is Keith Renery? Keith Renery was born on August 26th, 1960 in Brooklyn, New York. Raniere was known to be gifted in childhood, and his parents often reinforced this idea in Keith during his childhood. His father stated that it was like a switch went off in Keith's head one day, and he became this overzealous monster. Overnight, he had developed this superiority complex and began to deify himself. In his early adolescence, Keith began honing his manipulation skills on young women and his peers. He was known to be vengeful and calculated even at a young age. Keith claimed to be a genius with a 240 IQ, despite the highest IQ recorded being credited to a writer named Marilyn Vos Savant, who has an IQ of 228. So, okay, Keith. Keith eventually graduated from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute with a 2.26 GPA. So he basically failed or barely passed many of his classes, despite claiming to be the smartest man alive. So Keith eventually forayed in the multi-level marketing sector, as most genius-level entrepreneurs do. Ranieri first worked for Amway, a multi-level marketing company that sells health, beauty, and home products. He eventually founded his own multi-level marketing company, Consumers Byline, in 1990, under the premise that consumers could buy in bulk, and then if they all bought together, the price of those products would go down for everybody. However, there was a heavy reliance on recruiting, which is really the clearest sign of an MLM. Consumers Byline was ultimately investigated by 20 states and fined $40,000 by the state of New York.
I'll follow up tonight on Consumers Byline. We first told you about Consumers Byline last May when the company was accused of being an illegal pyramid scheme that uses unfair sales practices to sign up new members.
Ranieri signed a consent order permanently barring him from, quote, promoting, offering, or granting participation in a chain distribution scheme. So basically, he's legally not allowed to participate in a multi-level marketing scheme ever again. Seems pretty cut and dry to me, but a similar company to Consumers Byline was started by Keith in the mid-90s, but it sold vitamins instead, and it didn't last that long. It wasn't very successful. And like Consumers Byline, it wasn't long before NXIVM and Keith Renery were involved in more legal issues. By the early 2000s, some investigators who investigate likely cults had heard whispers of a new cult in upstate New York masking as a corporate success training program. Even the members of this cult would say that they're happy that they're in this cult, and if this is a cult, then call me sugar or whatever. Like, they were okay with it, but they really didn't understand what was going on here. The courses were designed to revere Keith Renery and began with chants proclaiming obedience to the vanguard that seemed to investigators like programming. NXIVM even celebrated Vanguard Week, which was a one-week celebration dedicated to Renery's birthday. NXIVM was also known to be a very expensive program, with one follower stating that 3 5-day courses, which were considered one training module, cost $15,000 total. Keith did not like this. Keith did not like that people were poking around his business. Keith was known to be a very vindictive person and very vindictive against anyone who questioned his teaching practices or came up against him. All of his training manuals had been copyrighted and were considered trade secrets, and he had the backing of some very wealthy and powerful people. In 2003, there was a lawsuit filed by NXIVM claiming copyright infringement after a cult investigator and deprogrammer, Rick Alan Ross, which I love his name. Rick Alan Ross had included material he obtained from a concerned former member of the NXIVM training manuals, and he posted it on his website, calling it expensive brainwashing, which I gotta hand it to this guy. I love that. The lawsuit was dismissed because Ross was bringing awareness to possible cult activity. This did not look good for NXIVM, especially after a critical story in Forbes, which originally the organization believed would be a positive piece, ended up dragging NXIVM very hard. The late Edgar Bronfman, the father of the Bronfman sisters, had stated in the Forbes article that he believed NXIVM was a cult and that he was concerned about his daughter's involvement both emotionally and financially with NXIVM. Apparently, the sisters were essentially financing the entire day-to-day operations of NXIVM. NXIVM is an example of a multi-level marketing company or pyramid scheme because rising through the ranks was based on recruiting others into the fold. So essentially you were selling the service or the program, not really necessarily a physical product. Eventually, they were able to get some minor celebrities like Kristen Kreuk from Smallville. She was recruited into the mix, and then she recruited her co-star, Allison Mack. Kristen eventually left the group when she researched more about the group, and she suspected it might be a cult and was concerned enough to get out of there before she got too deep. Keith Renery was attracted to the idea of bringing celebrities into the group, hoping that it would add some kind of credibility to NXIVM. A lot of the young recruits stated that Allison Mack's involvement and the involvement of other minor celebrities played a role in their believing that NXIVM was a reputable self-help group. In 2009, the Dalai Lama even made an appearance at a NXIVM-sponsored event at the Palace Theater in Albany, New York. Footage from a meeting between the Dalai Lama and the leaders of NXIVM prior to this event shows that the Dalai Lama had suspicions that there may have been ill intentions behind the organization, and particularly with Keith Renery. It was later revealed that there was a bribe paid to the confidant of the Dalai Lama by Clare Bronfman in order to help ease the Dalai Lama's suspicions. Yikes. The group grew and continued to recruit people until June 2017, when investigative journalist Frank Parlato went after the group. Frank had done some work for NXIVM, but after being charged by Ranieri with fraud, he decided to go after NXIVM with gusto. Ranieri had finally met his match and found a worthy adversary for his vindictive behavior. Here's the thing. Frank knew this organization wasn't on the up and up, and he knew that these women who were beginning to look starved and sleep deprived were definitely the victims of some kind of abuse for sure. His reports in the local news led to an even larger story in the New York Times, which detailed a secretive inner circle of women within NXIVM described as a secret sisterhood called DOS. Thanks in large part to Sarah Edmondson, a Canadian actress and a co-founder of the Vancouver chapter of NXIVM, details began to emerge about DOS, and it was not pretty. Starting in 2015, DOS was formed under the guise that it would be used to empower the women within NXIVM to become even more disciplined. DOS stands for Dominus Obsequious Sororium, which Keith claimed meant dominant over submissive. The actual meaning of these words is Master Obedient Sisterhood. But apparently nobody Googled that, because that just sounds sinister, like a BDSM dungeon bar or something. I mean, if you're into that sort of thing, hey, but at least you know what you're getting into when you walk into one of those bars. I don't even know if those exist, but if they do, that would be a great name for them. Well, maybe not after all of this, but before it would have been. So Sarah revealed that this group was based on a slave-master relationship and was sold to her as a kind of a guru-disciple relationship that would help her grow beyond what the NXIVM courses offered. Part of this relationship was that the slaves were required to respond to texts within 60 seconds, day or night. They were required to request to even eat the tiniest amount of food. And before they joined this group, they had to provide collateral. You may ask, why would anyone willingly offer collateral to someone in this manner? Keith had built a collateral system into NXIVM, which involved collateral in order to motivate oneself. For instance, let's say you want to eat a slice of cake at a birthday party. You might put something down as collateral like $50 and say, if I eat this cake at this party, then I have to give this $50 to my mom, right? The collateral would slowly increase in suffering in order to keep you motivated. Like maybe the next time you would put down $100, and then you might decide to deprive yourself of hot food for a week, or maybe take cold showers for a month. This was part of how the NXIVM program worked. So a big part of NXIVM was normalizing and desensitizing women to these behaviors. As for DOS, the collateral varied depending on what the slave had to offer. Some examples of collateral provided included letters with incriminated information about a loved one or oneself, physical collateral like the deed to a house or title to a car, or even naked photos. If they did not follow the commands of their master, they could face consequences such as having to pay a fine, but as bizarre as having to film themselves paddling each other naked, like with a BDSM paddle, or even risk having that collateral be exposed. Come on, ladies, really? A BDSM paddle? They were also required to provide increasing levels of collateral, such as videos of themselves cheating on their spouses or doing something sexual, something like that. As if the name wasn't bad enough, now he has them paddling each other. Sarah was inducted into DOS in March 2016 by Allison Mack and her master, Lauren Salzman, who was Nancy Salzman's daughter, as well as Sarah's best friend and godmother to her child. Sarah was brought to a condo in Clifton Park, New York, to a ceremony she believed would include getting a tattoo. However, it was revealed upon arrival that she would be branded, like a brand, with a brand in your skin. And she was told that this brand would be a Latin symbol of the elements and would be performed by a NXIVM-affiliated doctor, Danielle Roberts, using a cauterizing pen. The masters had the women get naked prior to revealing this and took their clothing away in order to force them into being branded. Besides the fact that the slaves had already provided all of this damning collateral, a lot of the collateral, like the notes and stuff they had written about their loved ones, weren't even true. They were told to just write bullshit, like that their uncle had molested somebody or something. Like, it was stuff that would ruin lives, completely ruin lives, potentially. The process of having a cauterizing pen dragged across your skin, I'd imagine, is extremely painful. And since there was no anesthetic and it lasted about 30 to 40 minutes per participant, it was like torture. After the ceremony was over, it was then that the women were given their clothing and allowed to go home. When Sarah got home, she realized the brand was not a Latin sign of the elements, but the initials KR for Keith Renery and AM for Allison Mack. After the shame and shock wore off, Sarah was horrified. She eventually came clean to her husband, and he was furious that the group had done something like this to her. The couple immediately withdrew from the group and began working on what would become Sarah's collaboration with the New York Times to expose this group for what it is. In December 2017, Catherine Oxenburg, an actress from Dynasty and the daughter of a Yugoslavian princess, revealed that her daughter, India, was also involved in NXIVM, and she was having trouble showing her what the truth behind the organization was. The story that Sarah did with the New York Times made it clear that India was in danger and needed to be extracted from this group as soon as possible. Catherine Oxenburg and Sarah Edmondson both appeared in multiple interviews to bring light to this issue. Like, I remember when Catherine Oxenburg came out about her daughter being in this, she was on everything. She was going to get her daughter out. Finally, in March 2018, Keith Renery was arrested by the federales in Mexico, where he had fled when the media attention got too intense.
Let's go in the car. We're gonna follow them. Get out of the way. Huh? Lauren's coming. Let's go, you guys.
Keith was indicted on charges related to DOS, including sex trafficking conspiracy, and conspiracy to commit forced labor. Not long after, Allison Mack was also arrested on similar charges. She was the first of Keith Renery's harem to fall. NXIVM president and co-founder Nancy Salzman's home was raided after Keith's arrest, and in May of that year, authorities seized 2 NXIVM-owned properties near Albany. This was not, however, the end of NXIVM. The operations moved to Brooklyn at some point after the arrest of Keith and was being led by Clare Bronfman, likely at the behest of Keith Renery. NXIVM continued operations until June 2018 when business was suspended. This closure was followed by the arrests of the Seagrams heiress Clare Bronfman, Nancy Salzman, her daughter Lauren Salzman, and NXIVM employee Kathy Russell, all on charges of racketeering. A large part of DOS was also that the highest tier of masters, their master was Keith Renery. And the slaves of those masters had no idea, because you wouldn't know who your master's master is. That was kind of the premise behind it. And what ended up happening is all this collateral was filtered and sent down, funneled down through to Keith Renery. And so Keith Renery was receiving all of this material, and part of DOS was restricting calories, restricting sleep, restricting who you can talk to, restricting involvement with your family, but also a large part of it ended up being having to seduce Keith Renery or do other sexual things just that he wanted them to do, basically, that he came up with whatever cockamamie reason that it was going to make them better people to do these things. But if someone tells you that you're going to be a better person after having sex with them, I wouldn't have sex with them, probably. At trial, Ranieri was still defiant and clearly showed no remorse. He even insinuated that the women were fully consenting participants and lying about his role. He was found guilty on charges that went beyond what the public expected, including sexual exploitation of a child and child pornography, sex trafficking, forced labor, identity theft, conspiracy to alter records, and then sex trafficking conspiracy, forced labor conspiracy, racketeering conspiracy, and wire fraud conspiracy. That's a lot. Keith was sentenced to 120 years in prison for his involvement with NXIVM. Allison Mack was just sentenced recently to 3 years for her involvement. So thoughts? I believe that NXIVM was just a front for a larger psychological experiment that Keith was performing on as many people as possible. I think Keith spent a large part of his time figuring out how to manipulate people to do his will. If anyone had done a background check, they would have seen that there were charges filed against Ranieri when he had carried on a sexual relationship with 2 different 15-year-old girls. One of which, later in life, was found with a bullet wound to the head and an apparent suicide at a Buddhist temple under suspicious circumstances. There were a few women in his life who ended up dead after having crossed Ranieri in possible covered-up poisonings. Like, for example, in one case, after his ex-lover's death from cancer, she was found to have elevated levels of bismuth and barium, highly radioactive substances. There are multiple stories like this. Honestly, I'm just scratching the surface of this story. Within NXIVM, Keith had a men's group, a women's group, and even developed a childcare center, the Rainbow Cultural Garden, with the premise that if children were taught 7 languages from a young age at a childcare center, they would be able to fluently speak all 7 of those languages. When you look at the tactics that Keith used in these poor people, it began with wiping their personalities. From the first training, you're kind of just told that everything that you feel and everything that you believe is wrong and that you're going to be rewired. After wiping their personalities, they then are reprogrammed to believe that Keith and other higher-ranking members were almost godlike. By doing this, Keith was able to begin grooming those members through manipulation into accepting behaviors that would otherwise be alarming in order to do as well. Some of those behaviors are the very crimes that these women are charged with committing, like identity theft, wire fraud, and multiple conspiracy charges. Oh, here's a thing that wasn't reported, really, largely. Allison Mack ended up marrying this girl, Nikki Klein, this other actress, in some kind of Canadian immigration fraud thing, which is, very highly illegal, but just weird to just add that sprinkle on to the mix of fucked up shit, right? As is the case with many powerful men, Ranieri thought he was untouchable. When he fled the United States, he never thought anyone would find him or that anyone would even care because he got away with these crimes for so long. But that's what happens when you create this false world around yourself. This case gets way deeper too. This is just the basics of what went on. I wanted to kind of keep this video shorter because I honestly could have made a 3-hour video. If you do want to see more about NXIVM, please comment below and make sure to like this video and subscribe so you don't miss my second video about NXIVM or my other videos that I do kind of semi-weekly. Thank you for watching.